Hi, good evening. In looking at the video from Albert Whitehat this week and the readings, one of the things that we can see is that in the words that were translated by the missionaries into the European language, so I guess maybe French and English, that I think one of the main things a couple of things were lost. One is the idea of relationship, and embracing a relative was a term used by Albert Whitehat, and how that was lost because it became prayer instead of like embracing a relationship. It was translated into prayer, and so over time that became a way for people to forget their relatives, is one of the things he said. So I think that in these translations what was lost is the interconnectedness. It was more like a hierarchy was developed or created in the translation of the words. You can find that also in Wakan when it was translated from life or energy to create life into sacred and holy. Again, instead of being like energy or life or creation of life, which is kind of a level playing field, holy or sacred again creates a hierarchy and a structure. And I think that in all these words, what happened is that it went from a relationship, a word that described a relationship, to a word that described like hierarchy or power. And so I think that's really important. It's extended into kind of the idea that these things aren't good and evil, they're good and evil. Like everything has both sides in it. And again, that takes like the hierarchy of this is good and holy and sacred as instead of interrelated. So good and then bad. And instead of like family and relatedness. So that's the first thing. The other thing was he talked about ceremony. And it was interesting because my expectation, in all honesty, kind of going into this week was that I would learn about ceremony kind of in a different way, and I'll be honest, a pretty Eurocentric, Euro-Christian understanding of ceremony, where there's a practice and these practices have meaning. They take place not always in a building, but in some sort of space, and the practices, each element of the practice is done to connect to a greater power. And so that was my perspective. And so I was really surprised, as I mentioned on the call earlier today, that really that's not the understanding of ceremony at all, as described by Albert Whitehat. It really is more about relationship and maintaining that relationship and developing that relationship with things. He even talked about that really all that's needed is to have a sage fire, like even if you can't have a fire, just like a shell with sage burning in it, is really all that's needed to connect with the relationship of everything, to find that spiritual connection. I think it's an interesting idea about sacred space, because while the space is sacred, it's not sacred because of its locality or what's there. It's sacred because of the way it connects to people, which I don't really fully, my mind is like doesn't fully grasp how that works. But I know that it's totally different perspective on how to look at things versus the Christian Eurocentric concept of space and place, and meaning making in the space occurs with the people who make meaning there, which is why we do practices, versus the Native American perspective where the space has meaning because of its relationship to the people, and to people and to really all things. So it's really an interesting kind of dynamic shift in what ceremony is, what practices, and what the point really of all of this is. Anyway, so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about in reading this week, some of the things that have kind of the connections that I've been making. I thought one of the things that Albert White had said in the video was go and connect with a relative, and he was saying, I guess someone had spoken to him about, not wanting to go to a sacred place and kind of disturb it, and he was like, no, go and connect with your relative. And I just thought that was kind of just a really like freeing thing to say to somebody, especially like coming at this from an outside perspective, to like go and connect with your relative, which is that space, which is the earth, which is the spirits in that sacred space. And his invitation was, I thought, really awesome. So anyway, thank you, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.